The age gap that changed everything. How I fell for him at 55 and he was only 24. The unexpected meeting. Lena stood at the airport, staring out at the bustling scene before her. She had always enjoyed traveling for work, the excitement of new places, new ideas, the sense of accomplishment that came with closing deals. Yet, today, there was something different. It wasn't the same thrill that used to excite her. It was as if, despite all the success and the whirlwind of business trips, there was a deep emptiness that had slowly crept in, settling in her chest. She'd been so focused on building her career, achieving success, that somewhere along the way, she had lost track of what really mattered to her. As a successful businesswoman at 55, Lena had everything: the career, the home, the status. But there was a loneliness in her life that she couldn't ignore anymore. Her marriage had turned stale years ago. She had tried to fill that void with work, but it hadn't worked. The passion had long since evaporated, leaving a well-mannered but emotionally distant partnership. There were moments when she would lie in bed at night, her mind wandering to what could have been. She had long since stopped expecting anything beyond routine affection. It was during one of these trips that Lena met him. She hadn't planned for it to happen. She was attending a business conference in a city she'd visited countless times before. As usual, she'd arrived early, preferring to stay quiet and collect her thoughts before the event. She made her way to the small cafe on the corner of the street, seeking a quiet spot to read a few reports. It was here that she first saw him. Max. At first, he was just another face in the crowd, a young man in his 20s with a relaxed posture and a confident stride, seemingly out of place among the older crowd attending the same conference. But there was something about the way he carried himself, his energy, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, that immediately drew her in. He wasn't flashy or overbearing. He didn't even seem to care much for the company he was with, a group of colleagues who seemed to be talking over one another, desperate for attention. Instead, he sat at a small table by the window, his eyes lost in a book. Lena found herself glancing at him repeatedly, trying to figure out what it was that intrigued her so much. Max caught her glance once, but instead of looking away, he smiled slightly, as though he knew exactly what was happening. There was a calm in his presence, an ease that had Lena feeling unexpectedly exposed. Her heart skipped a beat. Lena quickly turned her gaze back to her reports, pretending to focus on the papers in front of her, but she could still feel him in the corner of her vision. Something about the way he carried himself made Lena feel seen, not in the way her colleagues saw her, or even the way her husband used to see her, but as a person, as a woman. The thought startled her. She hadn't felt seen in a long time. She shifted uneasily in her seat, suddenly aware of the air conditioning brushing against her skin, and her own unease, which she tried desperately to push away. After all, she was a professional woman, used to commanding rooms full of people. She had built her life on the foundation of control, discipline, and focus. But Max, he was something different. She took a deep breath, gathering her composure, but it was too late. He was walking toward her, his footsteps slow, deliberate. He must have been on his way out of the cafe, but his path led him directly past her table. Lena lifted her eyes to meet his, and this time, she didn't look away. His smile was small, sincere, as though he wasn't just making small talk or being polite. "Excuse me," Max said softly, his voice smooth and kind. "I couldn't help but notice you seem like you're lost in thought. If you don't mind me asking, what's on your mind? Lena was taken aback. Most people would have smiled and walked on, but here he was, standing before her, engaging her in a way that felt both familiar and new. She hesitated, unsure of how to respond. What did she have to say to a young man who looked like he had the world at his feet, when she was struggling to figure out what came next in her own life? But instead of answering immediately, something inside her cracked open. She took a long breath, trying to pull herself together. But when she spoke, her voice was softer than she expected. I guess I've been thinking about how much time I've spent chasing things, achieving, and yet I feel disconnected. Max sat down across from her without asking, his eyes never leaving hers. I think we spend so much time looking for what's next. We forget to look at where we are, don't we? He said, almost as if he had known her for years. I mean, we're always running after something. I think what really matters is understanding the journey, not just the destination. Lena couldn't help but feel a connection to his words. They resonated deeply, though she didn't quite understand why. She looked at him more carefully now, taking in the details of his face, the soft tousle of his hair, the easy confidence he wore, like a second skin. And despite the years that separated them, there was an undeniable sense that they were both on a similar journey, even if their paths had been drastically different. I'm Lena, she said, suddenly feeling the weight of his gaze. Max, he replied with a grin. It's nice to meet you. They talked for what felt like hours, discussing everything from books to travel, from careers to life philosophies. There was a vibrancy in Max that Lena hadn't felt in a long time, something that drew her in and made her feel alive. She was aware of the age gap. Of course, she wasn't blind. He was a young man, barely out of his 20s, with the world ahead of him. She, on the other hand, was in her mid-50s, with a life built around experience, accomplishment, and the quiet routine of married life. But when they talked, none of that seemed to matter. Max spoke of living in the present, of seizing moments. His perspective was fresh, exciting, and unfamiliar, like a wave crashing against the rocks of Lena's structured world. She found herself laughing more, enjoying the conversation in a way that felt freeing. As they said their goodbyes, Max gave her a warm, lingering look, the kind of look that made Lena's heart beat a little faster than it should have. I hope we can meet again, he said, his voice sincere. I enjoyed this conversation. Lena watched him walk away, feeling the strange stirring in her chest grow stronger. She had met plenty of people in her life, but never anyone quite like Max. There was something about him, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. And as she turned back to her papers, trying to collect herself, one thought lingered in her mind, unspoken but powerful. This was only the beginning. First encounters. Lena couldn't stop thinking about Max. It had been 2 days since their unexpected meeting at the cafe, but the memory of his smile, his words, and the way he looked at her had remained etched in her mind. She tried to push it away, telling herself it was nothing more than a fleeting connection, a momentary distraction. After all, she was a married woman, a woman of her age. Max was young, barely starting out in life, and she was, well, older, with a history, responsibilities, and expectations. But still, she found herself thinking of him, wondering what he was doing, if he was as caught up in that strange, undeniable chemistry between them as she was. And the worst part was that she felt something that she hadn't felt in years. Excitement. A spark of life she had forgotten even existed. It started small. A text message from Max arrived the next evening. "Hey, Lena, I know we just met, but I wanted to say I really enjoyed our conversation. I think we should do it again sometime." Lena's fingers hovered over her phone for a moment. She wasn't sure how to respond. She didn't want to seem eager or overly interested, but at the same time, there was a part of her that couldn't deny the pull he had on her. She replied after a few moments, "I'd like that. Maybe we could grab coffee next week?" Max responded almost instantly. "Perfect. I'll find a place with a great view. Let me know when you're free." The simplicity of the message, his easy confidence, it all felt so natural. But Lena had to remind herself to stay grounded. She had a life, a well-established routine, and she wasn't about to throw all of that away for something that might just be a passing whim. But when Monday came, and she received a message from Max again, this time confirming the meeting details, she couldn't ignore the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. She was meeting him, and despite her best efforts, she knew it wouldn't just be coffee. There was something between them, a connection that couldn't be denied. They met at a small cafe with a rooftop terrace overlooking the city. The view was spectacular, the kind of place Lena would have picked herself. But the real attraction wasn't the skyline or the coffee. It was Max. When she saw him, standing at the edge of the terrace, looking out at the city below, she felt her heart skip a beat. He turned to her as she approached, and his smile was easy, warm, and genuine. "Hey, Lena," he greeted her, his voice low but full of warmth. "Glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss it," she replied, a little too quickly, but she didn't mind. She was here, and she was going to enjoy it. She had no idea how this meeting would go, but she felt a strange sense of freedom, as though she was stepping into something completely new. They ordered coffee and sat down, the conversation flowing easily, as it had before. They talked about books, travel, their childhoods, and the different paths they'd taken in life. There was an intimacy in their exchanges, not one based on years of shared history, but on a raw, honest connection. It felt refreshing to speak with someone who listened to her without judgment, who seemed to care not for her accomplishments, but for the person she was in that moment. Max spoke about his passion for writing, his dreams of traveling the world and capturing it through his camera. His energy was contagious, and for the first time in a long time, Lena found herself feeling excited about something outside of her usual routine. He didn't seem to see her age, her responsibilities, or her past. He just saw her, and that made her feel alive. "So, what about you, Lena?" Max asked, his tone genuine. "What do you want? What's next for you?" The question hit her unexpectedly, and for a moment, Lena was silent. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about her future. It was just that she had never been asked that way before. She had spent so many years focusing on everyone else's needs, on the expectations placed on her, that she had forgotten what she wanted. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've been so focused on my work, my career, that I think I've lost touch with what truly makes me happy. I used to love traveling, seeing new places, experiencing life in a way that wasn't just about getting from one goal to the next." Max's eyes lit up at her words. "That's the spirit. You deserve to live for yourself, Lena. You deserve to find the joy again." Lena was taken aback by his sincerity, his belief in her. It wasn't something she was used to. Over the years, the people in her life had become more distant, more concerned with their own needs than hers. Max, on the other hand, seemed to want her to feel free again, to be the person she had been before life's pressures had taken over. As they sat there, talking about their hopes, their dreams, Lena began to feel a strange shift within herself. There was a spark in her she hadn't felt in so long. Maybe it was just the excitement of meeting someone new, or maybe it was the simple act of being seen. Either way, it felt good. As the evening wore on, Lena realized that she didn't want the night to end. Max had a way of making her feel lighter, as though the weight of her responsibilities could be temporarily lifted. They spoke about everything and nothing at all, the conversation flowing easily between them, each word a new thread tying them closer together. Eventually, they stood up to leave. Max paid the bill, and they stepped out into the cool evening air. The city lights twinkled around them, casting a soft glow over the streets. As they walked toward the subway station, Max stopped and turned to her. "Lena," he said quietly, his voice suddenly serious, "I really enjoy spending time with you. I think there's something between us. I don't know what it is, but I feel like it's worth exploring." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what he meant. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, a magnetic pull that neither of them could deny. But there was also the reality of their age gap, of the world they came from, the different expectations placed upon them. But in that moment, standing on the busy streets of the city, Lena couldn't bring herself to reject it. She was tired of denying herself, tired of playing by the rules. "I feel the same," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the city. "But we need to be careful, Max. Whatever this is, it's complicated." Max smiled, his eyes glinting with determination. "I know, but I think it's worth the risk." As they stood there, the night air swirling around them, Lena couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. She had just met a man who made her feel like she was truly seen, and the thought was both thrilling and terrifying. But one thing was certain: her life, as she knew it, was about to change. The boundaries began to blur. As the days passed, Lena found herself spending more and more time with Max. What had started as a casual friendship began to take on a deeper significance. Their conversations grew richer, their bonds stronger, and the lines between friendship and something more began to blur. Max was unlike anyone Lena had ever met. He was carefree, unburdened by the expectations that often weighed down people of her age. Where Lena had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, managing a life full of responsibilities and obligations, Max had thrown himself into the world with passion and spontaneity. It was a refreshing contrast. He was full of life, of adventure, and at times it made Lena feel alive again, in a way she hadn't in years. But that very spontaneity, that fire, was also what made Lena uneasy. He was a reminder of the woman she used to be, the woman who could follow her instincts without worrying about the consequences, the woman who took risks and relished in the excitement of the unknown. That woman seemed so distant now, buried beneath the years of routine and practicality. They began to meet more frequently, sometimes for lunch, other times for long walks or visits to art galleries. With each meeting, there was an undeniable shift in the way they looked at each other. The laughter shared over coffee, the casual touches, the moments where their eyes lingered a second too long, it all felt like a slow dance of unspoken attraction. At first, Lena brushed it off as something fleeting, something that would pass. But it didn't. She found herself thinking about him when she woke up in the morning, replaying their conversations in her mind before bed. Max's presence filled her thoughts in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. They talked about everything: life, love, their careers, their dreams. And yet, the thing they never discussed was the undeniable chemistry between them. Max was patient, never rushing her. But there were moments when his gaze softened, when the air between them thickened, that Lena could no longer ignore it. One evening, they sat by a small lake near Lena's house. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden hue across the water. The air was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. Max had invited her for a walk, but it turned into something more. They sat side by side, their legs brushing as they spoke of their childhoods, their ambitions, and the things they feared. There was a quiet honesty in Max that Lena admired. He didn't hide behind pretenses or societal expectations. He simply was. And yet, even in that moment of vulnerability, there was something stirring beneath the surface for Lena. She could feel it, like a pulse of electricity in the air. She could feel herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She let out a soft breath, trying to steady herself. Max, I don't know what's happening between us. Max turned to her, his gaze unwavering. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. I know, he said quietly, his voice low. But I think we both know that it's more than just friendship, don't we? Lena's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the words hanging between them, heavy with meaning. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. How could she explain the conflict swirling inside her? How could she articulate the fear, the guilt, and the undeniable pull she felt toward him? I'm not trying to complicate things, Lena, Max continued, his tone gentle. I don't want you to think I'm just some infatuation. I'm not. I care about you, more than I thought I would. Lena's chest tightened. She looked away, trying to focus on the ripples in the water, but all she could see were the waves he had created in her life. She had always prided herself on being in control, of knowing what she wanted. But with Max, the lines were becoming too blurry. The boundaries she had carefully set in her life seemed to be slipping away. She took a deep breath. I'm not sure what I want, Max. I'm not sure I can do this. Max didn't respond immediately. He simply sat there, his hand resting on the bench beside her, inches away from hers. He wasn't pushing, wasn't demanding. He understood the complexity of what she was feeling. He didn't need to rush her, and that was part of what made Lena's heart ache even more. I don't want to pressure you, Max said, his voice soft but firm. But I don't want you to ignore what we have either. I think it's worth exploring. Lena stayed silent for a moment, processing his words. She had spent her life building walls that protected her, that kept her safe from the things she couldn't control. But now, sitting next to Max, those walls didn't feel as strong. The vulnerability, the possibility of something more, made her want to step outside of her comfort zone. But was it too late? Could she really embrace this feeling? This connection with someone so much younger? Would the world accept them? She turned to Max, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared, Max. I don't know how to do this. Max smiled softly, his eyes warm and understanding. You don't have to have it all figured out. We'll take it one step at a time. Lena nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life had already begun to change, and the boundaries between right and wrong, between what was expected and what she truly desired had already begun to blur beyond recognition. The secret kisses. The days that followed that evening at the lake were filled with a charged silence. Lena couldn't stop thinking about what Max had said, that he cared about her more than he had expected. The vulnerability in his voice, the way his gaze lingered on her with such intensity, made her heart race every time she remembered it. But just as she was beginning to feel like maybe, just maybe, she could open up to the idea of something more, the weight of their age difference bore down on her once again. She told herself it was just a fleeting infatuation, that she was simply caught up in the novelty of someone who made her feel seen, someone who reminded her of the woman she had once been, the woman who hadn't yet been defined by years of responsibility and routine. But no matter how many times she tried to convince herself, the truth was undeniable. The attraction between them was palpable, impossible to ignore. Max was persistent, and in a way, Lena admired that. He didn't shy away from the complexity of their situation. He was patient with her, waiting for her to make up her mind, never rushing her, but never giving up either. There were times when he would send her little text messages, small gestures that reminded her of how much he was thinking about her. A quote from a book they had discussed, a line of poetry that seemed to speak directly to her. Each message stirred something deep within her. And then one evening, it happened. The things that had been building between them, slowly and quietly, came to a head. It was a typical Thursday evening. Lena had invited Max over for dinner. Something casual. Her husband, Tom, was away on business, so it was just the two of them. The house was quieter, without Tom's constant presence, and Lena found herself at ease, more herself than she had been in a long time. She prepared a simple meal, choosing ingredients she knew Max would enjoy. Fresh vegetables, a homemade pasta sauce, and a bottle of red wine. Max arrived just as the sun was setting, the soft golden light streaming through the kitchen window. He was wearing a light blue shirt that made his eyes seem even brighter, his hair slightly tousled as if he had just run his fingers through it. When he smiled at her, something in Lena shifted. Her heart fluttered in a way that made her wonder if she had been fooling herself all along, pretending that the connection between them was something insignificant. They ate, they laughed, and the evening felt normal, familiar. But there was an undercurrent of something more, an energy between them that neither of them could ignore. Every time their hands brushed as they passed the wine bottle, every time their eyes met across the table, Lena could feel the tension building. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where they sat side by side on the couch, the soft glow of the lamps casting long shadows on the walls. They were talking about a book Max had recently read, but the words seemed to float by, meaningless in comparison to the intensity that was building between them. Max turned toward her, his face just inches from hers. "Lena," he said her name softly, as if it were a prayer, a question, a promise all at once. Lena's breath hitched, and for a moment she felt as though the entire world had slowed down. She could feel the heat of his body next to hers, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat echoing in the quiet room. She could see the way his eyes searched hers, as if waiting for her to say something, to give him permission to take the next step. But Lena didn't say anything. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that felt inevitable, like a dam breaking after holding back for too long. The kiss was slow at first, tentative, both of them exploring, testing the waters. But soon, it deepened. Lena felt her body respond, every nerve alight with an intensity she hadn't felt in years. She had kissed her husband 1,000 times. But this was different. This was raw, unfiltered, and full of yearning. Max's hands slid to her back, pulling her closer, his fingers brushing the fabric of her blouse. Lena's heart was racing, her mind spinning, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. For the first time in so long, she felt alive in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. When they finally pulled away, their breaths were heavy, their faces flushed. Lena's pulse was erratic, and her mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts. What had just happened? Was it a mistake? Was it something they could both walk away from? But Max, as if reading her mind, whispered, "This isn't just a kiss, Lena. This is something real, something that matters." Lena closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no answer for him, no words to explain the storm that was now raging inside her. But deep down, she knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. Max stood up, his hand still on her arm, and gently pulled her to her feet. They were standing now, face to face, their bodies so close that Lena could feel the warmth of his skin, the electricity between them. She wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but she knew she was at a crossroads, one that would determine the rest of her life. "I don't want this to be a secret anymore," Max said, his voice low but firm. "I want to be with you, Lena, no matter what it takes." Lena's heart swelled at his words, but her mind was clouded with doubts and fears. She had a life, a marriage, a career. Could she really throw it all away for this? For him? But when she looked into Max's eyes, all she could see was honesty, no hesitation, no doubt. Only the desire to be with her, to build something together. And for the first time in years, Lena realized that maybe, just maybe, what she needed most wasn't security or stability. It was to feel truly seen, truly desired, and to embrace a love that wasn't confined by rules or expectations. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know what this means yet, Max, but I'm willing to figure it out." Max smiled, a smile that lit up his entire face. "That's all I need, Lena. Just you, and whatever comes next." And in that moment, Lena realized that nothing in life had ever felt more real. The boundaries that had once defined her world were no longer enough to contain the love she was beginning to feel for this man. The guilt and the need. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tightly gripping the soft fabric of the sheets, trying to steady her breath. Her mind raced through 1,000 thoughts at once. Guilt, confusion, desire. The night before, everything had changed. What had started as an innocent connection, a spark between two people from different worlds, had turned into something undeniable. Max, with his youth and charm, had kissed her, and for the first time in years, she had felt truly alive. But now, as she lay in bed, the weight of that kiss was heavy, suffocating even. She couldn't escape the turmoil swirling inside her. She had a life, a family, a career. She had a husband who, though absent in many ways, had been a part of her life for decades. And yet, she couldn't deny the way Max's presence had made her feel. His eyes, his touch, the way he made her laugh, the way he made her feel like she was the only one who mattered in that moment. It was intoxicating. Lena's gaze shifted to her phone. The messages from Max had been frequent over the past few days. She had tried to distance herself, but every time her phone buzzed, her heart skipped a beat. His messages were simple, nothing extravagant, just checking in, asking how her day was, sharing a new book he was reading, sending her a song he thought she'd like. But it was in those small gestures that Lena found herself caught, her resolve slipping more with each passing day. "Why is this so hard?" she whispered to herself, curling up into a ball, the soft sheets offering no comfort. She didn't want to hurt her family. She didn't want to throw away everything she had for a fleeting moment of passion, no matter how real it felt. But Max, he made her feel like she was more than just a wife, more than just a businesswoman. He made her feel seen, alive, wanted. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Max. "Can we meet tonight? I miss you." Lena closed her eyes, her chest tightening. How could she ignore him? How could she keep pretending that nothing was happening, that she wasn't already falling? She knew it wasn't just infatuation. She wasn't a teenager anymore. This wasn't a crush. This was something deeper, something that threatened to consume her if she wasn't careful. The guilt gnawed at her. She had always prided herself on being in control, on managing every aspect of her life with precision. But now, with Max, she felt herself slipping. She had never felt more vulnerable, more exposed. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Tom moving downstairs, her husband, the man who had been by her side for over 30 years. Tom had always been there, dependable, predictable. But in recent years, they had grown distant, their connection reduced to polite conversation, shared responsibilities, and routine. They no longer shared the passion they once had. Their marriage had become a quiet acceptance of the inevitable, a partnership built on comfort, but lacking desire. She knew she was guilty of betraying not just Tom, but herself. She had allowed the flame of her marriage to burn out. And now, when something new, something exciting came along, she didn't know how to resist. She had convinced herself that she wasn't unhappy, that she didn't need more. But in Max, she found that missing piece, that excitement she had long ago forgotten existed. But guilt was a powerful thing. It made her question every decision, every moment she spent with him. Could she continue this? Was it worth the risk? She thought about the conversations she had with Max, the late-night talks that always left her feeling like she was walking on air. But those moments of connection with him felt like an escape from the life she had built, a life that, on the surface, seemed perfect. She closed her eyes and sighed, feeling the weight of the years she had spent building this life. She wasn't sure anymore what was worth fighting for. Was it the life she had with Tom, a life that had become predictable, stale, and lonely? Or was it the chance to start something new with Max? Despite the complications, the judgments, and the questions that would inevitably arise, Lena knew she couldn't keep living in this constant state of uncertainty. Something had to give. She had to choose. But how could she make that choice? Could she truly leave everything behind for a love that seemed so reckless, so taboo? Could she live with herself if she let Max slip away? Or would the pain of regret destroy her in ways that she couldn't yet understand? The sound of Tom's voice broke through her thoughts. "Lena, I'm heading out for a bit. I'll be back later," he called from the hallway. She heard the door close softly behind him as he left the house. Lena remained still for a moment, listening to the silence that filled the space. She felt the absence of both Tom and Max, each representing something she couldn't fully grasp. Tom, The stability she had once valued now felt like a distant memory. And Max, with his youth and unrestrained passion, felt like the future she wasn't sure she could afford to embrace. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. "I need to think," she whispered, standing up and walking to the window. She stared out at the world, the sky darkening as the sun began to set. Everything felt still, suspended in time. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Max too. She knew he had his own struggles with their age gap. He had never once shown hesitation, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that one day he would realize that he wanted more than just her. He would want someone who could give him all of the future he dreamed of. Someone younger, someone free to travel, to explore life without the weight of years and expectations. But tonight, she was going to see him. Lena wasn't sure what would happen, but something in her knew she couldn't walk away anymore. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just about the kiss. It was about taking the first real step toward living the life she had denied herself for so long. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed a message to Max. "I'll meet you tonight." As she hit send, the weight of the decision settled in her chest. There was no going back now. Lena was about to enter a world that was far more uncertain, more complicated, and far more dangerous than anything she had ever known. But for the first time in years, it was a world that felt alive, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The evening unfolded slowly, almost painfully, as Lena dressed with deliberation, her heart hammering in her chest. She ran her fingers through her hair, her mind in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The moment had arrived, and she had made her choice. It felt like stepping off a cliff, uncertain but inevitable, and the freedom in her choice scared her more than anything. She wasn't sure if it was fear of the unknown or the fear of how this decision would change her, but there was no turning back now. She chose a dress she hadn't worn in ages, a soft, black velvet piece that hugged her figure just right. It wasn't just about looking good, it was about feeling something. The sensation of the fabric against her skin reminded her of who she used to be, vibrant, full of life, and eager to feel more than just the quiet ache of a fading marriage. As she adjusted the dress, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman who had long buried parts of herself beneath layers of responsibilities, duties, and the quiet surrender of time. Now she was uncovering something new, something frightening, but alive. Her phone buzzed again. Max. The simple message, "I'll be waiting." Lena took a deep breath and left her room. She grabbed her purse, her fingers cold as they wrapped around the strap. She couldn't remember a time when she had felt this drawn to something, this alive. When she arrived at the small cafe, the dim lighting and the quiet hum of soft jazz music made the world outside seem a distant memory. The moment she stepped inside, she saw him. Max was sitting at a corner table, the glow of the light casting shadows across his features. He looked different tonight, more confident, perhaps even more mature than she remembered. He caught her eye and smiled, that same knowing, magnetic smile that always made her heart skip a beat. For a moment, Lena hesitated, her feet rooted to the floor. The guilt she had been feeling seemed to swell inside her chest, but it was quickly replaced with an overwhelming need. She couldn't ignore the pull any longer, not when she was standing right in front of him. She walked toward him, her steps purposeful, but still unsure of what awaited. When she reached the table, Max stood up. There was no awkwardness between them, no hesitation. It was as if they had always known this moment would come. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You look stunning," he said softly, his voice warm and inviting. Lena smiled, though it felt a little strained. "Thank you. You look different," she replied, her voice betraying the mix of emotions inside her. She had been prepared to face this moment with strength, but now, in the quiet of the cafe, it was harder than she had anticipated. Max gestured for her to sit, and she did. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor, echoing in the quiet room. There was a slight tension between them now, a weight that hadn't been there before. But it wasn't discomfort, it was anticipation, an unspoken acknowledgement that things had changed between them. They sat for a while, talking about nothing in particular. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did. They spoke of books, of their childhoods, of their favorite places in the world. But there was a shift in the air. The playful banter had faded, replaced by something deeper, more intimate. Max's eyes never left hers, and Lena found it hard to concentrate on anything else. "I've been thinking a lot about you," Max said suddenly, breaking the silence. "About us." Lena's heart skipped a beat, and she forced herself to take a steadying breath. "Max, I don't want to be the reason you feel conflicted," he interrupted, his voice sincere. "I don't want you to feel guilty for wanting to be happy. I know we're not supposed to be doing this. I know the age gap is huge, but Lena, I feel something when I'm with you. Something real." Lena's stomach twisted. She hadn't expected him to put it out there so plainly, so openly. For a moment, she couldn't speak. All the emotions she had been pushing down flooded her mind at once. The guilt, the longing, the desire, the fear. She wanted to tell him that it wasn't that simple, that there was so much more at stake. But the truth was, she didn't know how to say it. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this. I'm married. I've built a life, a career. And you're so young, Max. What do you see in me? What do I see in you?" Max reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on hers. The simple touch sent a shiver through her, and for a second, she was paralyzed. "I see someone who deserves more," he said quietly. "Someone who deserves to feel alive again." Lena closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking into her. She hadn't realized how starved she had been for something like this, for someone to look at her like she was more than just a wife, a mother, a businesswoman. She hadn't realized how much she had longed for someone to see her, truly see her, and want her. She pulled her hand away gently, her heart racing in her chest. "But we're not supposed to be doing this, Max. I can't just turn my back on everything I've built. I've been in this marriage for so long. What would people think? What would my family think?" Max leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're asking the wrong questions, Lena," he said softly. "This isn't about them. This is about you, about what you want. Do you still want what you have, or do you want something more? Something real. Something that makes you feel alive again?" Lena sat there, speechless. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, her mind trying to catch up with the emotions that had been stirred up. Max was right, in a way. She had been living a life of quiet resignation, accepting the role she had been assigned. The role of the dutiful wife, the responsible businesswoman, the mother. But what if she wanted more? What if she could have more? Before she could respond, Max stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked at her one last time, his gaze full of something she couldn't quite name. I know I'm asking a lot, but I think you already know what you want. I'll be here, Lena, whenever you're ready, but I won't wait forever. And just like that, he was gone. Lena was left sitting in the cafe, the empty space between them still palpable, still charged with the energy of everything unsaid. She was alone again, but this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't the comfortable silence she had known for years. It wasn't the silence of routine. This silence was pregnant with possibility, with uncertainty, with a future that she could no longer ignore. She had a decision to make, and this time, it wasn't just about the life she had built. It was about the life she wanted to live. Lena sat there for a long time, thinking about everything. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to control her life, her choices. But now, she realized that true strength wasn't about control. It was about the courage to choose what was right for her, even if it meant letting go of the past. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally ready to make that choice. Facing the judgment, Lena was ready to face herself, her emotions, and the choices she had made. However, life wasn't as simple as she had hoped, especially when her decisions began to be scrutinized by those around her. Lena entered a challenging phase when her relationship with Max was no longer just a secret between the two of them. Unfortunately, not everyone was willing to accept the difference in their love. Unexpected reactions began to emerge from the people closest to Lena, forcing her to confront the societal judgments she had once dared to challenge. One Saturday afternoon, Lena was sitting in one of her favorite coffee shops, a cup of black coffee in hand, and the newspaper spread out before her. She was trying to calm herself, but her thoughts kept swirling around. Just this morning, she had received a phone call from Sarah, her best friend. "Lena, I've heard about Max. Are you sure? Do you really think this is a healthy relationship?" Sarah had asked with a worried tone, but Lena could clearly hear the judgment in her words. Lena couldn't help but ask herself, is this love with Max strong enough to overcome all the criticism? Then came the family meeting. Her mother, Margaret, sat across from Lena in the living room of their old family home. Margaret didn't speak for several moments, simply staring at her daughter with concern. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but full of sorrow. "Lena, you're too old to follow your feelings like this. I don't know what to say. You're making me disappointed." Lena felt a lump in her throat, but she tried to stay calm. "Mom, I know I can't change everything, but I can't let go of Max. I love him." "You love him?" Margaret repeated, as if she couldn't comprehend it. "Lena, you're not a young girl anymore. You have a family. You have a life of your own. He's younger than you, just a boy. You have to face the realities of life, not live in a fantasy. I don't know what you're thinking anymore." Those words haunted Lena. She had always known that her relationship with Max would face obstacles, but she hadn't expected that the people she loved most would be the first to turn their backs on her. Then, that evening, a phone call came from an old friend, Jake, someone Lena had known since her early days in the city. Jake had heard about her relationship with Max through mutual friends, and he was taken aback. "Lena, I understand that things can get complicated, but do you really think this relationship is good for you? People know about the age gap between you two. Maybe you need to rethink it," Jake said, his tone concerned. Lena felt like she was being cornered, not because she was wrong, but because of the love she had chosen. Everyone around her seemed to think she had lost her way, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being judged by people who didn't understand. Max, who had always supported her, was now beginning to feel the tension too. He came to Lena one evening, looking exhausted and worried. "Lena, I can't ignore this anymore. Everything we've done is being judged by everyone. The phone calls, the criticisms, even the silence from your old friends. I can't let you bear this alone. What do we do?" Lena was silent, her heart heavy. She wasn't sure how to answer him. The relationship they shared had caused too much tension, and she wasn't sure if she had the strength to fight for it anymore. This was the moment Lena had to truly confront the decision that would shape her life. Would she continue to walk this path of love, despite the opposition, despite the hardships, and face the societal stigma? Or would she walk away from a part of her heart to return to what was safe and familiar? This part of the story marked the point where Lena could no longer escape from herself and the deep emotions she had kept hidden for so many years. The decisions she would make in the next chapters would not only change the course of her relationship with Max, but also force her to rethink everything she had ever believed about love, age, and acceptance. The fight for love. Lena sat by the window in the late afternoon, staring out at the fading light. Her mind was full of swirling emotions: fear, longing, confusion, but most of all, a quiet determination. She had already crossed a line with Max, one she couldn't undo. But now, her world was at a crossroads, and she had to decide if she would keep moving forward with him despite all the obstacles, or if she would retreat back to the comfort of her old life. The constant judgments, the whispered conversations, the concerned glances, she couldn't escape them. Lena had tried to hide it, tried to brush it all aside, but every time someone mentioned the age gap between her and Max, it stung. She had lived most of her life by societal standards, following the expected path: marriage, children, a stable career. But this was different. This was a love she had never expected, one that threatened everything she knew to be comfortable and safe. Max noticed the change in her. He had always been able to read her like an open book, but now there was something distant in her eyes, something that made him question if they could survive what was coming. He could feel the weight of the pressure bearing down on them both, but he was determined. He was young, but he was no fool. He had known from the start that being with Lena wouldn't be easy, but he didn't care. He loved her. He wasn't going to back down, and he wasn't going to let anyone convince her that they didn't belong together. "I know this isn't easy for you," Max said one night, sitting beside her in their living room. The soft hum of the city outside made everything feel both alive and suffocating. "But I can't keep pretending. We can't keep pretending that this is just a phase, Lena." Lena's gaze drifted to the window. She couldn't look at him. The words she had been holding back felt like a storm ready to break. "I'm not pretending," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can handle the judgment, the looks from everyone, the whispers. I don't know how much longer I can pretend it doesn't hurt." Max reached out, gently taking her hand. He looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. But there was also a quiet sadness in his eyes, one that mirrored her own fear. "We don't have to hide anymore. We can fight for this, Lena. I'm not afraid. You don't have to be afraid either," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I love you, and I want to be with you. We can handle what comes, together." Tears welled up in Lena's eyes as she looked at him. How could she explain to him that the fight wasn't just about him or her? It was about everything. The world around them, their families, their friends. How could she possibly reconcile the love she felt for him with the expectations of the world? I don't know if I can lose everything, my friends, my family, even my career, she said, her voice shaking. I've worked so hard to build my life, Max. I've built walls around myself to protect me from pain, but now I'm afraid I'll lose everything if I choose you. Max's expression softened, his thumb brushing over her hand in a soothing motion. Then let me fight with you. We don't have to do this alone. We've come this far, and I'm not going to let go of you now. Lena was silent for a long time, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had always been a strong woman, confident and independent, but now she felt more vulnerable than ever before. She didn't know how to fight for love when everything seemed to be falling apart around them. Later that week, Lena had a heart-to-heart conversation with her colleague Grace, who had been one of the few people to notice the change in her. Grace was the type of person who had a sharp, no-nonsense approach to life, and she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Lena, I know you think you're doing the right thing by keeping this to yourself, Grace said, sipping her coffee as they sat in the quiet corner of their office. But you're not living. You're just existing. I can see it in your eyes. You're terrified of what people will say, but you know what? It's your life, not theirs. Lena looked at her friend, surprised by the bluntness of her words. I'm not sure what you mean. I can't just disregard everything I've worked for, everyone who loves me. It's not that simple. It's not simple, but it's simple enough, Grace replied. Love is always messy, Lena. It's complicated, and it doesn't come with a manual. But you can't spend your life living for other people's approval. You have to live for yourself. Lena knew Grace was right, but that didn't make it easier. She had built her life around what was expected of her, and now, with Max in her life, she was being forced to confront a different version of herself, a version she didn't recognize but longed for. The next day, Lena decided to take action. She would no longer hide. She would confront the judgment and face it head-on. But she didn't know what that would look like, and she didn't know what would happen after. She could only hope that the love she shared with Max would be enough to carry them through the challenges ahead. When Lena told Max about her decision, he didn't hesitate. He was ready to face the world with her, to fight for their love, no matter the consequences. The couple began preparing for the inevitable storm. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were willing to face it, together. They would have to deal with the fallout from family, friends, and society, but they were ready to embrace the love that had defied the odds. The final decision. The days that followed were a blur of emotion and uncertainty. Lena had never been so sure of one thing in her life. She loved Max. But the question that gnawed at her, the one she could not shake off, was whether this love was enough to weather the storm of judgment, disappointment, and fear that lay ahead. In the days following their decision to face the world together, Lena's life felt like it was divided into two distinct halves. On one side, there was the safe, predictable existence she had built over the years, her stable career, her home, her friends, and her marriage to a man she had known for decades. On the other side, there was Max' unpredictable, spontaneous, passionate offering, her something she had never allowed herself to fully experience, raw, unfiltered love. Lena had always prided herself on being independent, on making decisions with a clear head. But now, Every choice she made felt like it had the weight of 1,000 expectations pressing down on her. She didn't know if she could have both the life she had known and the love she had found in Max. Her relationship with her husband, David, had always been steady. They had shared years of companionship, mutual respect, and stability. But somewhere along the way, their connection had dulled. David had become a background presence in her life, someone she cared for deeply, but no longer felt the burning desire for. He had been there for her through thick and thin, but their intimacy had long since faded into routine. Max, on the other hand, was everything David wasn't. He was spontaneous and filled with the kind of passion Lena had been missing for years. His presence brought a spark into her life that made her feel alive again. But that spark came with a price. One evening, after a long day of grappling with the tension between her heart and mind, Lena found herself standing in front of the mirror once again. She was preparing to meet Max, who had invited her to a quiet dinner at a small, intimate restaurant they had frequented in the past. As she gazed at her reflection, she saw more than just the familiar lines around her eyes or the silver in her hair. She saw a woman who had lived for others, who had sacrificed parts of herself for the sake of convention and stability. But now, standing at this crossroads, she had to ask herself, could she continue living a life that wasn't truly hers? Or would she take the risk and pursue the love she had found, no matter how unconventional or challenging it may be? Lena arrived at the restaurant, the soft glow of candlelight casting shadows on the table where Max was already waiting. He stood as soon as she walked in, his eyes lighting up as he greeted her with a warm smile that sent a flutter of excitement through her chest. They sat down, and for a few moments, there was a silence between them, comfortable but heavy with unspoken words. Lena could feel the pull between them, stronger than ever before. Her heart raced in her chest as she finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot," Lena began, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly as they rested on the table. "About us, about everything." Max reached across the table, taking her hand in his thumb gently tracing circles on her skin. "I've been thinking too," he said, his voice soft but filled with determination. "I know it's not easy. I know it might never be, but I'm willing to fight for this, for us." Lena looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity in his gaze, the same sincerity that had drawn her to him from the start. She felt a rush of emotion swell inside her, a mixture of fear, desire, and hope. "I don't know if I can give up everything," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "My life, my friends, my career. I've worked so hard to build what I have." Max's grip tightened slightly, as if to reassure her. "You don't have to give it all up, Lena. You can keep what's important to you. But I believe you deserve more than what you've been settling for. I believe we can build something together, something that's real, something that makes you feel alive." Lena's eyes welled with tears, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable. She had spent so many years hiding behind her responsibilities, her roles, her expectations. But now, for the first time, she was allowing herself to question everything. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of what this will mean. I'm scared of what I'll lose and what it will cost." Max smiled softly, his fingers brushing the back of her hand. "I'm scared too," he confessed. "But I'd rather be scared with you than live a life where I'm not truly living at all." In that moment, Lena realized something. She realized that the life she had been living, one of routine, expectations, and fear of judgment, was no longer enough. She had spent so many years playing it safe, but she didn't want to live a life of regret. She wanted to live for herself, to take the leap, to fight for the love she had found with Max, even if it meant losing everything she had known. "I'm ready," Lena said, her voice stronger now, filled with newfound determination. "I'm ready to fight for this." Max smiled, his eyes shining with hope and love. "Then we'll fight together. We'll face everything that comes our way. And we'll make it work, no matter what." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of quiet conversation, shared laughter, and a sense of peace that Lena hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she didn't feel torn between two lives. She had made her decision. She was ready to face the challenges of their love, knowing that it wouldn't be easy, but that it was worth it.